Good morning, everyone. We are here for another one of our PulseZ online community events, and today we are joined by Andras Tomsha, and we are going to discuss more about the impact that social media plays within our society, how it shaped the evolution of discourse between ourselves as members of the society, and how we can build a more balanced approach to social media. So Andras, if you could please tell us a bit more about yourself first, so we get to know each other a little bit better.
Thank you, Dragos. Thank you so much for the very broad introduction. I'm Andy, or Anders Tomsha for the long version of my name. I essentially work for YMCA Europe. Currently been working on comms side of the YMCA Europe team. Right now I'm focusing mostly on PulseZ projects. I've been in the comms for the past 7 years. After I graduated university, I have a background in communications and science communication, journalism, but not necessarily on that side, mostly on the content creation side. I would describe myself as a socially enthusiastic person that really wants to see what works, what doesn't work in the field of social media. And it's a great opportunity to be here and put a little bit of my insight into this platform. So thank you.
Happy to have you here. And what I think is very important to ask in the first place, obviously you said your background is in comms, correct?
Yes.
How does practice differ from theory? How does the thing that you do on a day-to-day basis differ from what you've learned within college doing your studies in social media?
Honestly, social media and comms, nowadays you cannot talk about comms without social media or any sort of media that's developing and growing at this point. It's grown a lot. I've graduated, this will also show my age. I've graduated in 2017, just a couple of years before COVID. And at that time, social media comms has been completely different to what it is at this very moment. My background, I've studied at the University of Manchester. I did science communication with a straight focus on the journalism and social media and how the media impacts comms. And when I graduated, I moved a little bit into marketing. I was trying to figure out the field of comms, and because I also had a bit of an artistic side myself. And I've been experimenting a lot. I've been playing a lot through the years. And I would say probably in 2021, I had the chance to finally settle down in this field. And I was stopping, chasing clouds and seeing what works, what doesn't. And I was focusing 100% on comms, social media. That's when I had my first connections professionally with the YMCA. I used to be a volunteer before that. And I could say that the field has changed in so many ways. And in a very short, very broad answer, I would probably say that before 2020s, social media was essentially showcasing the culture. And honestly, after the pandemic, after COVID and everything, I feel like the social media nowadays is really dictating the culture. So it's a bit of a transition period, I'd say.
So what are some of the largest changes you've seen in the way people discuss about social media, people interact with social media over the past 7 years? And obviously, I think it's very important to also put a spotlight on the pandemic because, as you've said, it's been a complete shift in our culture. So what are these major steps that you've seen forward, or it can even be backward, over the past 7 years with your experience in the field?
Well, it's a very good question. I would say it's a very, again, I'll try to keep myself a little bit focused. I would say the development of the social media platforms. If you look at the history of, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and I'm not talking, before 2019, I'm not going to mention TikTok. These trio used to be like the core platforms. And of course you have YouTube, which is, again, it's one of the community building platforms, which really focused much more on building a connection with your audiences. It was more genuine. It was more into really showcasing something that is of value or that provides some value to the audiences. And at that time, even monetization and the ad revenues was incredibly different. It was, in many cases, I'm from Romania, and honestly, it's been only in probably 2014 when the monetization started up in the country. So it was a different time. It was mostly, these platforms were designed to create groups, to create connections, to really bring people along and showcase something that is of value. It could be a hobby, it could be, some cultural things, it could be, watching movies. It'd be something that connects to people at a different level. It wasn't about selling. It was nothing about reach, or, it was mostly about really communicating and conveying meaningful connection. Then again, platforms like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, they were not part of the same group, as you know, and it literally had their own sort of communities, their own sort of patterns and way to sort of define yourself. And it was mostly about genuine and meaningful connection when it comes to building a brand at that point. I think nowadays it's a little bit more about creating the brand and pretty much selling the brand to your audiences. And it's a different type of connection with the audiences. I'd say, again, I don't want to be that nostalgic kind of person that says, like the past was better than now. It's been a bit different in matters of these meaningful connections between people.
But also what I think is a very interesting shift is the following. So when we were talking about before COVID, we were talking about platforms which emphasized the community, as you said. These were platforms where you, as a member of that community, aligned with your favorite creators due to shared interests, shared values, and so on. But what we keep on seeing and developing in the past few years is specifically this development of algorithmic social media, where your actions are dictated more or less by the preferences of the algorithm, by trying to find that secret sauce that can help propel you to the top of the algorithm. So also with this, we've seen the development of short-form content in the past few years, even though it might seem like something that was a given ever since social media existed. Let's not forget that it's something that only appeared in 2019, 2020 as a mainstream form of content, and now it's basically the dominating form of content on social media. So how would you say short-form content has influenced the relationship that people build with social media itself?
Very, very big one, very good one as well. It is interesting. I would say social media was more connected to, like, focused on building a personal and meaningful brand before the pandemic. I feel like after the pandemic, because the situation has been very clustered, has been very intrinsical, and everything was a bit more personal and a bit more individualistic at the same time. I feel like the short form content has pretty much taken all that big content, all that sort of widespread, a wide range and array of information spreading, and a little bit of more cinematic sort of presentation of everything from, a product to, a movie, or, bits from your life or vlogging or anything that's of that sort, to something that's a bit more pretty much like a pill that you take to sort of cure your boredom, or, which again, that was part of it, but now I feel like it's more effective. I feel like nowadays is more, it's not about art, it's mostly about really ticking that box that your audience needs. It's a bit more of a depiction of what was like in the past. It's kind of like you take the content and you break it down and you give it to the right audiences. Again, I'm not against it. I'm not for it either. It's just like, it's the way it works. I personally, I'll still stick to the cinematic long form pieces of content. But still, I'd say, if you're looking for a specific information, if you're looking for something that's technically very like on spot and you want it at a very short amount of time, short form content really does that very well. And it's probably a very artificial way to sort of understand and see your creators these days, because I feel like you kind of have like a very fast forward conception of that person, and I feel like building that connection, that meaningful, that deeper connection, really takes time. And I feel like the short form content just gives you like a little bit of a pill of what that would be. So I would say, I don't know, like the future will probably be a bit, like, I feel like the short form content will still thrive. I feel like it still goes on. I feel like it's still there. It's not going to go away. I feel like it's probably going to be even shorter. Depends on the attention span of the people. I can't really take you any studies at this point, but I feel like the way it goes, it will change. However, I don't think the cinematic content will go away because if you look at it, we still go to cinemas, we still go to watch movies, we still have that appreciation for the long form of content. And I feel like the short form, because again, content is so much, and especially when we talk about these platforms, they're so varied, and each of them has a specific field, a specific genre, and somehow you need to differentiate, and sort of create communities and build it, to have to be very specific. So I feel like those tiny, bite-sized bits of like short-form content are very good to kind of direct people towards the longer form of content. So I feel like they're still interchanged, or they still work together. But again, what the future will bring, I'm not sure. But maybe we could discuss today. Maybe we can bounce some ideas. I don't know.
Would you say to some extent that we are seeing a commodification of culture on social media? So this constant drive to get the most amount of satisfaction out of the shortest amount of time or the shortest form of content, as you've said, it's like taking a pill to fix that specific need for boredom. So are we moving from something that is more related to finding out to something that is more related to satisfying a craving almost for information?
I'll say it does, and it will. If you haven't noticed yet, social media is commodifying everything that's around us. It is pretty much like the snack that you take between very important tasks. It could be also the task. It is also that particular sort of construct that keeps people connected. And as I said, I feel like nowadays it really dictates the culture. Before it was pretty much all about showcasing how we are, how we sort of create things. But I think nowadays, even if you throw in the AI bit in it, I feel like it's creating something that we as humans would never have had the chance or thought about it. I mean, just, I'm not going to go deep into the, conversations about brain rots and stuff, but I feel like all that would not be possible without the AI, because again, that's like a different tool that humans would kind of use to, bring and open new doors. And it's very interesting now thinking about it. I feel like, commodifying things for sure. I think this is, again, we live in capitalism, right? So we all crave a little bit of commodities, a little bit of something. We trade our time for pleasure, for certain things that makes us feel good. At the same time, if we are not really indulging into all these bits, if you use it in a way that you're sort of seeking something, I feel like it's a good avenue to have some form of let's say chill out, relaxation and all that, but also it's an avenue to a bit of a more meaningful connection to the communities and to the people, to the society. Because I don't know, like back in the days, people used to talk a bit more amongst themselves in a face-to-face format and contacts. And also I feel like the pandemic has changed that a lot and shaped it differently. And I feel like nowadays social media have become that avenue where you could showcase yourself, again, in certain ways, the better version of yourself, the worst version of yourself, but it's still an avenue of communication. And I feel like it's definitely going to be of great value. Also commodifying that beauty and glamour, but also having like offering a meaningful tool for us to communicate at a different level that we would never do before, I'd say.
Also, then I think it's very interesting to explore the following idea. So obviously with the rise of algorithms, not only young people, but most of society has this tendency to fall more and more into overuse of social media. Because when you have an algorithm which is that powerful to know your every desire, to know your every intricacy of your personality and so on, since it knows you better, it knows also what to exploit better from your needs. Maybe maybe some people have issues with their own self-image. So obviously an algorithm will exploit that specific insecurity to keep you hooked. Maybe some people have issues with eating disorders, let's say. And the algorithm will notice that and exploit that to feed you content which will keep you into the same loop of anxiety and of constant engagement with creators which help fill that gap. So to what extent do you think that these large platforms should be held accountable for abusive practices, let's call them, for practices which exploit young people's and obviously society as a whole's vulnerabilities.
It is very interesting. Now, I'd say, in the past, we used to have different forms of avenues of information, and we used to have like the classic media. We used to have the classic news from newspaper to radio to like shows and essentially sort of newscasters and broadcasters. And nowadays we have something that is something between what is officially held accountable and what is not, like that gray area that we consider social media. And I know you're into the advocacy perspective of it. I'd say it is incredibly interesting to see how in 2014, social media and this field of the internet at large has been pretty much like a wild west of, whoever's there is posting whatever, no one would take it seriously until they have a strong influence on elections or, driving the population towards rallying towards certain rights or changing, literally, debunking and changing governments in many countries. So I feel like the power of social media is growing, and so is the necessity to have certain guidelines and certain policies to sort of create that sort of funnel in which we know that whatever is built in social media is safe for the society at large. Again, this also brings the question of the algorithms because, smarter people than myself have thought about ways to create certain types of content that's specifically designed, clustered for a certain group of people. And they know exactly how to get to and how to reach those people. And it is incredibly fascinating to know that there's no way you could fend off the algorithm. There's no way you could play with it. Of course, they might give you the option, they might give you the opportunity to use the tools and to think that you are in full control of it. But there's always something tiny, little, small that you never notice and you realize that is tracking you even before you ever realize there's a tracker or the concept of tracking. And I feel like it is incredibly essential to address that. I feel like it's a conversation that needs to go on and needs to be present everywhere. I feel like social media, I won't say it needs to be policed. I'd say, again, with regards to the freedom of speech, to the, I feel like it's important to have an avenue that is also held accountable for its influence on the life of so many people, because we're not talking just about, the political systems in many countries. We're looking, in our families, we do have cousins, members of our families, brothers, sisters who've been bullied, who have, because of the lack of certain restrictions or certain platforms, they are in a situation where nowadays, they, committed suicide, or they had this situation where they're literally afraid to go out on the streets because everyone know them for certain things that, they're not really, they're not able to control, they're not able to sort of raise any actions against, and therefore I feel like policing social media is important, but also to understand that it needs to be aligned with the legislation and the constitution in all the countries that we're discussing. And I know this is like a very wide and broad topic. I feel like I'm one of those people that I'm neither on one side nor on the other, but I'm on the side that needs a bit more transparency, and I want to know where my informations are going. I want to know where also the channels would be going, and I feel like this is, we're getting into this capitalism, enigma where you don't know exactly what, that particular, again, these avenues, these channels are not necessarily avenues of free speech or free communication or, freedom of anything. They're corporations, they're companies that are sort of like channeling the direction of it. So again, depending on what the direction of the company is, that's where the social media will go as well. So it's a very windy road, and that needs to be regulated for sure, I would say.
It's very much, I'd say, an ongoing debate. I mean, there is no right answer to this because we still haven't figured out the approach that we as a society want to have on the topic of social media. Like, for example, if we are talking about legislation and regulation applied, obviously you can see the European approach where pieces of legislation like the Digital Services Act and the AI Act aim to build a more humane approach to social media, but also at the same time you are imposing regulations over the largest players, not only in the tech field, but over the largest companies that exist at a global level. So it is very much about where do you intervene with regulation to protect, and where do you intervene with regulation but stop competitivity and stop the development of entire economies as a whole. But what I'd say is also very interesting on the matter is basically these trackers that we have embedded in each one of the platforms. All of them are creating specific profiles of their users. It is pure profiling.
Yeah.
You are defining a person by their age group, their interests, their insecurities, so many other things that we do not know yet because there is no algorithmic transparency. But also, how can we make sure that these profiles and these very specific pieces of information collected about each one of us do not end up on the wrong hands? Not only private actors, but also state actors or repressive governments in the case that there is a transition from a democracy to an autocratic regime. How can we know that we are still safe with this information on these platforms?
This is, that's a very good question. I don't think we will ever be able to have the full control of it, because as I mentioned before, we're talking about big corporates, big companies that again, they played capital role of making sure that every interaction, every engagement there turns into profit, turns into a capital. So again, we ourselves, every interaction, every movement that we have on those platforms is not 100% within the laws of the countries that we are using the platforms on. So many times would be thinking that, I'm just using like a safe source of content, like a safe source of platforms. But in reality, whatever you do online, whatever you do on the internet, you're selling a bit of information, a bit about yourself. Could be your ID, your phone number. Again, could be like information, very sensitive information from your passport or your ID card. Because nowadays, everyone is checking to see, if you're like a real person. And again, that is a very interesting question with regards to where my information is going and how will it be used, against me or, for the betterment of the society. And honestly, from what I've seen, and again, I'm a bit pessimistic on how all the bits of information and all the sort of everything that's gathered from us as users is used within the society. Because from what we've seen so far, social media could be a very strong and powerful tool. I'd say what's happening in the European Union nowadays with all the regulation and all the legislations, the GDPR, especially after Cambridge Analytica discussions and situation, I think we're a couple of steps ahead of many countries. But at the same time, we don't understand 100% where our information is being outsourced, and what is the third party that will use everything that we've done that we know to create something that will be a bit of a, I don't know, it could be something that will support the society, the growth of the society, or something that could literally destroy us. How do I know that, as you said, tomorrow my government will turn autocratic and everything that we knew about democracy could change overnight? How do I know that the police will not come to my door and say, oh, because of your post, because of your comment on this particular individual's social media, you could be held accountable, you could be arrested just like that. So again, it is, to be honest, if you look at what's happening now in Russia as well, and in many countries, many regimes across the world, social media is no longer a safe space for sure. It is a place where information could be used in many cases against yourself, against your family, and again, I'd say social media from this point of view, it still is a bit of a wild west of data collection, data gathering. My advice would be to avoid as much as you can, to share as much of yourself over there. I would say be a consumer, try to see what works, and try to find that avenue that doesn't collect the most data off of you. Try to see where your freedom, and try to see in long term, why am I watching this? Why am I seeing this? And what could happen to me in a certain, put yourself in different scenarios. And I would say start developing a bit of a critical thinking of things. Just because it feels like an innocent advert, an innocent piece of cookie, everything is a data that's being collected, that's being stored somewhere. So the way you portray yourself on social media could be used for sure. And I don't think there's transparency at large. There is within certain frames, but there's always going to be, the dark web. There's always going to be a place where things will be stored, where they'll be incredibly out of bounds, out of reach. So the way you portray yourself, it's literally the way you will be portrayed pretty much forever. And it is a dangerous game. It is a dangerous place to be if you don't understand what could be used against you. And again, there's also the thing that a lot of people don't realize. Social media is not, it's not like a platform where you just go and you enclose yourself in your own bubble. It is part of a society. And oftentimes what you're saying there, what you're writing there, the hate speech, also the good things, the bad things, everything is being used by your government. Because I'd say that's the way it goes. It's again, I don't like this rhetoric. It's another form of control, but it's another form of checking how your community is going, how the society is going. And just like in the past, it used to be like diaries, and people, when the Inquisition would go to certain countries, and they would, they would check your diaries, they'll check your journals, they'll check your papers and everything. Nowadays, it's a lot easier. They just look you up on whatever platform, and they find loads of things about yourself, your political allegiance, your preferences, things about your family, and oftentimes even sensitive data like your phone numbers, addresses and stuff. So I would say thread carefully on social media. I personally, I've been using social media for probably over 15 years now. And I've not seen, in my case, I see it as a connector, as a place where you could still connect with people, with communities, with groups, with friends, families, but it's not a place of trust all the time. And, is a place where things could change at all times, and always be wary and aware of the fact that also that platform can change in no time. I mean, we're seeing how the transition of various platforms like Twitter, X, has changed the whole demographic, the whole situation, and also you see how certain accounts, certain people have become the target of the far right. And radicalization is also like a topic that we could discuss more of within this framework. But I'd say whatever you do online, you don't need to get to social media. Everything that's online, do it with care, cautious, and be cautious about the actions that you're taking. Just as a citizen of every country, you're still an online citizen. And just because you're hiding yourself under an account doesn't mean that you're not part of the question, you're not part of the legislation, the regulations of certain countries. So I would say thread carefully. Social media is a place where you need to understand, to understand the cues, understand the dangers, but also understand its point in connecting people as well.
I mean, to some extent, even though we tend to have this interpretation of social media as a bubble, it is also very much a reflection of the society in which we live. And coming back to something that you mentioned a bit earlier, we've seen this swift transition, at least in the case of the United States, where political agents have started putting more and more pressure on the social media platforms to align their internal policies and their internal algorithm with the policies put forward by the new Trump administration. So, do you think this is a phenomenon we will see more and more commonly throughout the future, having this paradigm of cooperation between platforms and government rather than cultivating this relationship of opposition, as you see, for example, in the case of the EU, where regulation is the more common approach to these big platforms?
I'll say for sure. I mean, the society is being transforming at this current time, and for sure, I'm definitely prepared to see more of it. I could see from what we've seen, what we've experienced in the eastern side of Europe with the elections that happened like last year and this year. And I think we'll definitely see more of it. For sure, social media is a strong tool to radicalize as well as present facts in so many ways. However, it is an avenue where, this society turns back into tiny little groups, and these groups cannot be they could be controlled, but at the same time, you can never predict what could happen or what would be, out of this. Again, I'm very curious of what's going to happen now with the introduction of the AI, the next level of the social media of like attending 3D meetings and, being in this augmented reality sort of setting, and how would that play a role in the society at large? Because for sure, I feel like this could also open up a little bit of a new avenue towards, a more active participation to the democratical, setup within every different countries. But also, I'll definitely see a lot more radicalization and a lot more use of data and information against the people in many countries going forward. Because what happened, in the U.S., what happened in Europe, and what's still happening is also a result of the facilitation of the information from certain groups to certain groups, from certain individuals to certain individuals. I feel like social media is facilitating this avenue of information, and I feel like in the past we used to have this, it was the radio, it was letters, it was like doves, in the very, very old ages, and nowadays we have this tool that in 5 seconds you could turn a whole country against certain individuals, or you could turn a whole country to work towards someone or an ideal, or and I feel like nowadays we need to be even more cautious than we were like 10 years ago, because reaching out more people has been easier than 10 years ago. And also with this process of I'd say brain dumbing, that a lot of the memes and a lot of these fun things that are they seem very they seem like they're not going to harm you in any ways and forms. And however, those could be also tools to prepare the population for an easier control of a let go of critical thinking. And I feel like this would put us in a very dangerous spot in the next couple of years, because again, just look at just a regular scroll down on TikTok or Instagram. You watch 2-3 videos of cats, something that you're passionate about, and then all of a sudden there's this crazy guy who shouts and does certain things, which in the beginning it seems quite inoffensive, and it seems like a decent guy, a decent person. But then, in 3 months' time, you just realize that their whole rhetoric changes. And, then you start to think, oh, it's so easy. If you generally follow and think that certain people are, nice, and, in 5 seconds, you feel like, oh, I've known these people for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, this whole paradigm changes. And then you realize it's literally just like in the past. But we don't have that reaction time at this point. We don't have the reaction time to see, okay, maybe if you watch 3 hours of content, if you watch this person for 10 years, okay, this guy has got like a certain alignment, I could trust him or not, or this person is suitable for me or not. But nowadays it's so difficult because the reaction is very fast. So nowadays you could be the most liberal, the most loving person ever, and in a flip of a coin you could inadvertently turn into someone that you don't even want to be yourself. This is the thing. And, a lot of people are talking about these programming and, brain programming and stuff. I'm not into that sort of, conspiracies and stuff, but I do believe that social media could be used as a dumbing, I would say probably, as a dumbing mechanism to ease out the population and sort of control people much better. It is, if you look in the ancient times, Romans have pane et circus, is like the show where you receive some bread and you saw the gladiators and all these people fighting, slaves fighting. It's pretty much the same. You offer something pleasurable to people because, again, people want something that they could connect instantly. And then their mind is really soothed down and very chilled. And then you could pretty much work with them in any ways, forms, and shapes and sizes you want. So I would say nowadays, the control of the population and the reach of certain messages and certain influences is a lot faster than it was in the past. And the problem is the bureaucratic system that we have in many countries that is not yet ready to respond to that. So that's the danger.
I'd say also to some extent the fact that you are able to offer continuous exposure to certain ideas, to certain positions related to our society and to our communities. Obviously, after a certain point, you start normalizing those ideas. They become something that you take for granted rather than be something that you judge critically, because obviously, if I come up to you and I tell you for 10 years that you will be a great football player, at some point maybe you will start internalizing that.
Sure.
You will start acting as such. In the same way, if I come and constantly pitch a certain point of view about a certain piece of society, about a certain group within it, then after continuous exposure, a lot of people will actually open up to that idea and perceive it as something mainstream, as something accepted by majority of the population. So implicitly you start internalizing it as well. So I think it's something that's very worrying and that we always need to keep in mind and to make sure that the perspectives that we get are our perspectives and they are defined by our values, by our moral compass, rather than being defined just by the majority's perspective. Because maybe also if we're talking about these systems which tend to influence the algorithm, and if we are talking about coordinated attacks towards a specific society or towards a specific segment of the society, then we have no capacity to understand how much of it is the genuine perspective of our society and of the people around us, and how much of it is a specific and deliberate effort to change our opinion on a certain subject. As you've said previously, we can see what happened with the elections all across Eastern Europe during this past year and all across Europe, more broadly speaking, because it's been a phenomenon that we also noticed in Western countries as well. But also, since there are these many concerns about privacy, about algorithmic transparency, about even government control to some extent, do you think that in order to cultivate a healthier relationship with social media and to cultivate a more open approach to it, do you think there's any chance we'll see the emergence of open source social media platforms where it is specifically the community which has full access to what the algorithm can do and what it does, where it is the people who themselves are stakeholders in the evolution of the platform, so a more democratized approach compared to a top-down control of these platforms?
Yeah, this is one of the topics I've been thinking for a very long time. So it's a very good question. I'd say, and they will come. I feel like their time will come as well. And if we're talking about our consortium within PulseZ, if you consider we're 8 organizations coming together to create a platform that's not centralized, that is providing users and young people, young journalists, content creators, influencers, the avenue for them to create and be themselves. and really talk about their meaningful content, their meaningful stances on anything that's from democracy to current news to key topics around Europe and the world, will be the future. And I feel like, as we see and as we saw in the democratization of Hollywood, for instance, in the past, how difficult would it be to set up a movie and create something of a just 5 minutes of production would be like a fortune. Nowadays, we have loads of independent small producers, thanks to the emergence of platforms like YouTube, that come together, and in no time you could be on a broader platform like Netflix. And again, I'm not gonna go, these are like still the corporate models, but I feel like this is like a very good grounding for what's coming next and what is happening now everywhere around Europe, with the emergence of short form pieces of content and influencers who are dedicated towards a cause, who are bringing some value, like meaningful value, and they want to see a change. And their contribution and collaboration and building and bridging these consortium organizations would be a great groundbreaking model that I would say would have certainly a niche, because again, it is very important to create a platform where the voice of not just those people who have the money, the tools, the resources to film themselves could be and sort of talk about the topics that they themselves, only themselves, like a small, tiny group is interested in, but to have also like a tool and a platform for the majority, for the people that really are passionate, that have a voice, that maybe they're from underprivileged communities, that also present a different perspective and showcase a different Europe, if you want, is inevitable. And it is something that needs to be there, I think, on the internet, and it needs to be discussed more, and it needs to be analyzed more, and I feel like it's something that needs to be promoted more as well. And we see, like, slowly, bit by bit, I feel like these independent social media platforms are connecting and bridging and creating something of let's say, an island of free speech, of connecting people, of empowering people, empowering young people, empowering voices, and also visions, and showcasing young people that out there is not just, billionaires and people with loads of money showcasing their luxury lifestyle and stuff. Social media could also be an avenue where meaningful news and, insights from your community, from your society, is as valuable as everything else. As you as a person, and not as a product, are of value. And I feel like this is something that social media, independent social media platforms or avenues could create. And again, maybe we're not platform ourselves in the sort of generic term of being a big company that builds a strong avenue that's sort of walled and shielded by the governments and so on. But we create an avenue for those who really need to express their voices and visions in a different ways. And this is the beauty, that we democratize and we promoted this idea of democratizing social media and democratizing the voice of all creators. If you look at ourselves, we all have, and we could all tell at least one story, the story of our lives. So this is something that each of us could contribute towards any avenue. And I feel like if we come together and, we embrace projects like PulseZ, for sure we could get very far in our journey. Again, if this would be successful in 10 years' time, it is hard to tell, because, the ground itself is changing and shifting all the time. So I would say it is definitely a project. And these are projects that will arise. And, if we look at independent journalism, it needs to be there. We need to have a voice that is not paid by any political parties, by any sides, that is showcasing a world that is of the facts rather than, the politicization. And of course, everyone at the end of the day, in all the objectiveness, everyone's subjective. But it's important to have the voice of everyone and to have a better understanding of the world that's out there.
And this is from a platform's perspective, but also from a creator's perspective. Do you think authenticity is the new clickbait in the next few years? Do you think that we'll see this re-emergence of sincerity, of openness, of true one-to-one dialogue compared to what we're seeing today, which is attention grabbing, commodification, selling of your identity and so on? Or are we still far from that?
I'm not sure how far or how soon these conversations between, we used to have this saying back home in our village, like just two ladies, two men at the side of the village on a bench discussing and having like visions of the lives. And honestly, that type of let's say if you wanna film that, put it in a content format, I'd say that would be more meaningful to a lot of people than a lot of the clickbaity stuff that are currently happening. I feel like social media is overcrowded with ads, and I feel like the avenue is super saturated with this flashy content, over edited, we need a bit more simplicity in the whole thing. And this is one thing that I appreciate about TikTok is the platform somehow, again, it's not a paid platform on TikTok. I'm not, it's full disclosure. It's just that what's really interesting with the algorithm, it really emphasizes authenticity much more than really well scripted, well edited, and well designed form of content. And I feel like this, let's say, alternative form of content is there, and in a way, it will crawl its way through all this paid environment. If you think about building meaningful and genuine connections with people, we will have more success if we have more of that content than paid content. If you look in long term, of course, something that's more genuine, if you keep on being yourself, if you keep on building something that is not flashy, that doesn't have like a 10 years perspective, being something that's valuable in the moment, that creates this naturalness, is definitely more valuable, and it's more cherished even within the algorithmic positioning within the social media platforms. I saw that on TikTok, I saw that also on Instagram, and Facebook, it's still a ground, it's sort of changing, but I feel like that will come quite soon. And I honestly, in my case, I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more of that. And this is probably seen through also the emergence of live streaming, because live streaming is also like showcasing like the real nature, the real value of a person, and not necessarily like as a product, but also as a human being. And honestly, I feel like in long term, probably live streaming will be like the new fourth dimension of social media.
It's really interesting to hear, and it's really interesting to see how, after all, staying true to yourself is what's going to propel you forward, what's going to be the differentiating factor compared to a creator who will just push a product or push a lifestyle and so on. And I would like to thank you for this very insightful discussion. I feel like we've managed to touch on a lot of subjects related to the future of our relationship with social media, and I think it's very good to keep our eyes open and to try and, well, first of all, stay true to ourselves, to be constantly on the watch for the direction that our newly online society will take, and to make sure that after all it's something that's people-driven, not profit-driven. So, Andy, thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you all for joining us for this online event, and we look forward to hearing and seeing you for the next one. So, have a great day, everyone.